Some bands don't just survive decades, they get bigger with time, pulled back into the spotlight by generations who weren't even born when the songs first came out. While plenty of their peers from the same era have faded into nostalgia acts, playing county fairs and casino ballrooms, a handful of classic rock bands have somehow stayed woven into everyday life, blasting out of car radios, wedding receptions, graduation ceremonies, and viral videos alike, decades after critics assumed their moment had passed. What's strange is that almost none of it happened the way a record label would have planned it. No marketing team engineered these comebacks. They happened by accident, through television writers, teenagers with cameras, and an internet nobody in the original bands could have imagined existing when these songs were first recorded. Today, we're looking at three legendary bands who are still massively popular right now, the surprising, sometimes accidental reasons why their music refuses to fade, and how each of them found an entirely new audience without changing who they were. Let's begin. Journey. If there's one song that proves classic rock never really died, it's Don't Stop Believing. It's the kind of song that shows up so often in everyday life, at ball games, in movie trailers, blasting out of a bar jukebox at closing time, that it's easy to forget it was ever just an album track, competing for attention against dozens of other new releases the week it came out. Released in 1981 on the album Escape, the song only reached number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 at the time. A solid hit, but nowhere near a chart-topping phenomenon, overshadowed on the charts by plenty of songs nobody remembers today. For years, it was just one more track in Journey's catalog, respected by longtime fans, but not treated as the band's single defining statement, not even the biggest hit off its own album. Then, something strange started happening. The song's massive, delayed chorus, the one that famously doesn't kick in until nearly the 3-minute mark, a structural choice that would have gotten most songs rejected by radio programmers at the time, kept finding new audiences, decade after decade. First, through steady classic rock radio play, then through an unforgettable placement in the abrupt, cut-to-black final scene of The Sopranos in 2007. A moment so widely debated and discussed that it sent an entire new generation searching for the song's title the very next morning. 2 years later, the television show Glee built an entire episode around it, introducing the song to a younger television audience who had genuinely never heard of Journey at all, some of whom assumed it was a brand new song written for the show. But it was the streaming era that turned Don't Stop Believing into something almost unprecedented in music history. The song has now been streamed more than 2 billion times on Spotify alone, making it one of only a small handful of songs from any era, let alone the classic rock era, to cross that kind of threshold. For years, it stood alongside Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody as one of the only 2 songs from their generation to pass 1 billion streams on the platform, a milestone guitarist Neil Scott celebrated publicly online, before the song eventually climbed even higher still, continuing to add tens of millions of new streams year after year, with no sign of slowing down. In 2022, the song was formally inducted into the National Recording Registry by the Library of Congress, an honor reserved for recordings deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant to the nation, with original vocalist Steve Perry calling the recognition the greatest honor of his life, ahead of any chart position or sales figure the song had ever achieved. Keyboardist Jonathan Cain has told the story many times of where the song's title actually came from. A phone call home to his father, back in Chicago, during a discouraging, broke period, when he was seriously questioning whether to give up chasing music entirely. And his father's simple, blunt response, "Don't stop believing," stayed lodged in his head long enough to eventually become one of the most recognizable choruses ever written. Steve Perry himself has said that even before the song became a radio hit, live audiences reacted to it differently than anything else in their set, responding to it the way fans now respond to it at stadiums, decades before the charts ever caught up to what the crowd already knew. Today, the song is a permanent fixture at graduations, weddings, sporting events, and karaoke nights around the world. Proof that a song builds around a slow, delayed emotional payoff, the kind that modern algorithms would likely flag as too risky for a single, can end up outlasting nearly everything that was released around it. There's a second, less famous story that helped keep Journey culturally alive during the same period, and it happens to involve the exact same internet that would later fuel the song's streaming explosion. After original singer Steve Perry stepped away from the band, Journey cycled through replacement vocalists for years without ever quite recapturing the same magic. In 2007, guitarist Neil Scott began searching YouTube, specifically looking for singers with the right kind of voice, and he stumbled onto grainy footage of a Filipino bar singer named Arnel Pineda performing Journey cover songs with his own local band in Manila. Pineda's own path to that moment was genuinely brutal. Having left school young after his mother's death and spent 2 years living on the streets of Manila as a teenager, bathing out of gas station water barrels and surviving on ration biscuits before eventually clawing his way into a singing career, first performing in local bars and clubs for whatever small crowds would listen. When Scott's email first reached him, Pineda assumed it was an elaborate hoax and nearly ignored it entirely, only replying after a persistent friend convinced him to check. Within weeks, he was flown to California, auditioned, and was announced as Journey's new lead vocalist by December of 2007, a decision that initially divided longtime fans, skeptical that anyone could replace Perry's voice. The band's own keyboardist, Jonathan Cain, later admitted it sometimes took an entire show for skeptical crowds to fully accept Pineda, but by the encore, they were typically won over completely. The story became so widely discussed that PBS produced an entire documentary about it, and it remains one of the earliest, clearest examples of a legacy rock band using the internet not just to promote old songs, but to actually rebuild itself from the ground up. That reinvention mattered, because it meant Journey wasn't just coasting on a single viral moment when the streaming boom eventually arrived. They had an active, touring lineup ready to capitalize on it, still playing Don't Stop Believing alongside other enduring hits like Faithfully and Open Arms to sold-out arenas well into their 6th decade as a band. Unlike acts that reunite briefly for a nostalgia tour and then disappear again, Journey kept releasing new material and touring almost continuously, which meant that when a new fan discovered Don't Stop Believing through The Sopranos or Glee or a random algorithm recommendation, there was an actual, active band still out there to follow. Not just a museum piece, Frozen in 1981. Santana. Carlos Santana had already built a legendary career by the late 1960s, delivering one of the most talked-about performances at Woodstock in 1969, with a set that reportedly happened while Santana himself was still coming down from psychedelics he'd taken, believing his band wouldn't go on stage for hours, only to be rushed on early and forced to play one of the most electrifying sets of the entire festival, while, in his own later telling, fighting to keep his guitar neck from visibly turning into a snake in his hands. That performance alone cemented his reputation as one of the most distinctive guitarists in rock history, blending blues, rock, and Latin rhythms into a sound nobody else was making at the time. But by the mid-1990s, that legacy had quietly faded from the mainstream. Santana hadn't landed a top 10 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 since 1970, nearly 3 decades earlier, and younger listeners largely knew him, if at all, as a name from their parents' record collection rather than an active, working artist. Then, in 1999, everything changed. Santana released Supernatural, a comeback album built around an unusual, and at the time, risky strategy, pairing his instantly recognizable guitar work with a rotating cast of much younger guest vocalists from entirely different genres, an approach his label reportedly pushed hard for, after early sessions produced nothing that sounded like a hit. The lead single, Smooth, featuring Matchbox 20 frontman Rob Thomas, became an inescapable phenomenon, spending 12 consecutive weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and staying on the chart for 58 weeks total. A run so dominant that Billboard would later rank it as the second most successful single in the chart's entire history, trailing only Chubby Checkers The Twist from 1960. Supernatural went on to sell more than 13 million copies in the United States alone, and roughly 30 million worldwide, and swept the Grammy Awards, winning 8 trophies in a single night, tying a record previously held by Michael Jackson. A result Santana has said in interviews he's still processing, decades later. What makes Santana's continued relevance especially remarkable is that Smooth isn't even his most streamed song today. That title actually belongs to Maria Maria, another single from the same album featuring Wyclef Jean, which has quietly outstreamed Smooth on platforms like Spotify and YouTube in the years since, gathering more views on its official video than Smooth ever did, showing that Santana's late career resurgence wasn't a one-song fluke built entirely on nostalgia, but a genuine, lasting rediscovery of his sound by an entirely new audience who kept coming back for more of the album rather than just the single they'd heard on the radio. Santana has continued releasing music well into his 70s, bringing in guest artists across generations on later projects, from Steve Winwood to Kirk Hammett of Metallica, and remains one of the very few classic rock guitarists whose signature tone, that instantly bending, singing sustain, is recognizable within seconds to listeners who weren't alive for his original run of fame in the first place. Even Rob Thomas, decades after Smooth first topped the charts, has said in interviews that the two of them are still occasionally approached to perform it together, joking that after 25 years, he and Santana have grown genuinely tired of hearing other artists cover their song. A small, funny sign of just how thoroughly it embedded itself into popular culture. What's easy to overlook looking back at Supernatural's dominance is how big a gamble the whole project actually was at the time. Record executives were reportedly nervous about pairing a 60-something guitar legend with younger alternative and pop vocalists. Nobody was sure his existing fanbase would accept. And Santana himself has said the album very nearly didn't happen the way it did, with producer Clive Davis pushing hard behind the scenes to keep the sessions focused on genuine songs, rather than loose jams. That gamble paying off as spectacularly as it didn't just revive Santana's career for a few years. It fundamentally reset how the music industry thought about pairing veteran artists with younger collaborators, a formula plenty of other legacy acts have tried to replicate ever since. Rarely with anywhere near the same success. If you're realizing these bands never actually left, they just found new ways to reach you, whether through a television finale, a viral skateboard video, or a stranger halfway across the world uploading a cover on YouTube, that's exactly the kind of story we love telling here. So hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Let's continue. Years quietly faded from the conversation. Journey had a delayed chorus that took nearly 3 decades, and decades before streaming platforms, before YouTube, before TikTok even existed as an idea anyone could have pitched in a boardroom. And yet, here they are, still filling stadiums, still soundtracking weddings and graduations, still finding brand new fans who weren't alive for a single note of the original recordings. But not every legendary band got the second act they deserved.